Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. So we're studying Swami Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga. This is chapter 8, the talk on realization. We're well along in it. And before we move on, and to assure that we're all on solid footing, are there any questions or comments about this, which the Swami himself says is a very difficult system of thinking to wrap our awareness around? So any comments or questions at all? Okay. We'll start just a tiny bit above where we left off last week. We have to give up all our miseries and sorrows, all our little joys. Quote, that which the Vedas declare, which is proclaimed by all penances, seeking which men lead lives of continence, I will tell you in one word, it is Om. You will find this word Om praised very much in the Vedas, and it is held to be very sacred. Now Yama answers the question, what becomes of a man when the body dies? So now we have the question. This wise one never dies, is never born. It arises from nothing, and nothing arises from it. Unborn, eternal, everlasting, this ancient one can never be destroyed with the destruction of the body. If the slayer thinks he can slay, or if the slain thinks he is slain, they both do not know the truth, for the self neither slays nor is slain. A most tremendous position. So I'm going to repeat what Yama says, because as the Swami says, now Yama answers the question, what becomes of a human being when the body dies? This wise one never dies, is never born. It arises from no thing, and no thing arises from it. Unborn, eternal, everlasting. This ancient one can never be destroyed with the destruction of the body. If the slayer thinks he can slay, or if the slain thinks he is slain, they both do not know the truth. For the self neither slays nor is slain. A most tremendous position, Swami Vivekananda remarks. I should like to draw your attention to the adjective in the first line, which is wise. As we proceed, we shall find that the ideal of the Vedanta is that all wisdom and all purity are in the soul already, dimly expressed or better expressed. That is all. we shall find that the ideal of the Vedanta is that all wisdom and all purity are in the soul already, dimly expressed or better expressed. That is all the difference. The difference between person and person and all things, the difference between one person and another and all things in the whole creation is not in kind, but only in degree. The background, the reality of everyone is that same eternal, ever blessed, ever pure, and ever perfect one. It is the Atman, the soul, in the saint and in the sinner, in the happy and in the miserable, in the beautiful and the ugly. In men and in animals, it is the same throughout. It is the shining one. The difference is caused by the power of expression. In some, it is expressed more, in others less. But this difference of expression has no effect upon the Atman. If in their dress one man shows more of his body than another, it does not make any difference in their bodies. The difference is in their dress. We had better remember here that throughout the Vedanta philosophy, there is no such thing as good and bad. They are not two different things. The same thing is good or bad, and the difference is only in degree. The very thing I call pleasurable today, tomorrow, under better circumstances, I may call pain. The fire that warms us can also consume us. It is not the fault of the fire. Thus the soul being pure and perfect, the person who does evil is giving the lie unto himself. He or she does not know the nature of himself. Even in the murderer, the pure soul is there. It does not. It was his mistake. He could not manifest it. He had covered it up. Nor in the man who thinks that he is killed is the soul killed. It is eternal. It can never be killed, never destroyed. Now, before the Swami goes on to this further definition he's headed into as a quote, is there any question or comment about this concept that each of you manifested in this case by an image on a screen, each of you sitting wherever you're sitting, is simply a wrap around this eternally pure, ever perfect, undying, unborn presence called the Atman. You are not born, you will not die. This action and experience suit appears to be born because of our understanding, our limited understanding. It appears to be born, it appears to live a life, and it appears to die. This is what the Swami is saying. Is there any comment or question?
Hi, Brother Shankara, this is Somesh.
Yes, Somesh.
Hi. It's very profound, but that raises a lot of questions in my mind. That first is that, we talk about if I'm the slayer is, there is no slayer and there is nobody being slayed. At the same time, we give an example of a murderer and like good, bad, evil. Then who is getting that good, bad, evil? If it's
The Lord and the Lord only. This is what Krishna says in the Gita in chapters 3 and 4, quite explicitly, Somesh. The Lord alone is the doer. It's in our ignorance that we see anything else happening. And of course it's confusing, Somesh. Of course it is confusing. There's every reason for us to be confused because these ideas are counterintuitive. They do not fit with our genetic programming, as John Dobson so eloquently pointed out. They absolutely do not fit with our genetic programming, and our genetic programming is very insistent that no, I am right, not these other ideas. So the only way to discover the truth that the Swami is speaking of is to turn inward with some form of introspection, prayer, contemplation, concentration, which moves into meditation, as Patanjali points out. But there's no way that the rational mind, the reasoning mind, can be convinced of this. You can take a provisional stand for it with your reasoning consciousness. You can say, all of these saints, all of these scriptures have said it's true. I'm going to provisionally believe it's true and behave as if it's true and see what happens and follow their instructions about how to find out if it's true.
Okay. Okay. I consider a possibility of this. And then where does the karma, like, so do I accumulate my karma? Do I, then if Lord is doing everything, if Lord is...
You have no karma.
I have no karma.
You have no karma. You as the Atman, you as the divine presence that is manifesting this body for its own purposes. All the karma belongs, as Krishna says so explicitly in the Gita, all that belongs to him. Give it to him and be free of it. Be free of the idea of it. Be free of the results of it. And what does he say? Do that and I will protect you. And I will see that you do not suffer in the way that you've suffered before. It doesn't mean that the body doesn't suffer. The body and the mind suffer, but you experience yourself as something other than that and see that suffering as something happening in your presence. And as Holy Mother says, destiny herself strikes from the book of record what is written about you. And if you were to receive a sword blow that would sever your leg, that will not happen if you have purified yourself in this way of offering everything to the divine presence and seeing everything that happens as the divine doing. She says, something will happen. You will have a pinprick, but you will not experience the severity. Why? Because you no longer need to. You've learned the lesson.
Okay. In my understanding...
Somesh, I just want to reemphasize this. Just get this idea out. If you wish to pursue this, just get this idea of I and mine out of your head. There is no such thing as I and mine. It is the Lord alone doing and being. You have no karma. You have no possessions. And if you want to convince yourself of that, just think about what happens when you leave the body behind.
Mm-hmm.
What happens to those possessions? Were they yours? No, they were the seat you were sitting in while you flew this airplane from birth to your apparent birth to your apparent death. That's all.
And I don't carry it to the next birth or carry it with me.
If you if you truly grasp this as the wise one that the Swami is talking about, Somesh, there will not be another birth. The birth is a thing of the body, of the appearance. It's so that we can learn these lessons, and we want to learn these lessons. We want to be many. We being that, the divine presence. It is absolutely, as Swami Vivekananda points out, pointless to ask why we do this, why the divine wants this. We cannot know the mind of the infinite.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to repeat what I understood so that I'm clear. So, I'm considering the possibility that
Somesh, I'm going to ask you to do something. I'm going to ask you to contact me separately so we can have this discussion.
Okay.
I'm reluctant to take up the class with just these concerns that are yours. I honor your concerns. I honor your questions, but I don't want to take up the whole class time with them because there are other people who may have comments or questions, and there's more for us to take in.
Absolutely. I'll reach out to you.
Please do, because I'd love to have this discussion with you, and it would be, I think, very fruitful for both of us.
Okay, great. I'll reach out to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone else? Anything?
You had mentioned that this teaching is contrary to our genetic programming, and it also seems to be part of our genetic programming for sexual expression and reproduction.
Oh, absolutely.
It says here, that which all the Vedas declare, which is proclaimed by penances, seeking which men lead lives of continence. By continence, they mean complete abstinence or restriction?
It depends on your state. Are you a married person, or are you a monk or a monastic? A nun or a monk.
So devotion.
A monastic. What is the purpose of continence? It's not a question of good or bad. It's a question of if you practice brahmacharya, if you practice restraint, either in a marriage or the total restraint of a monastic, what happens is you slowly accumulate something called ojas.
Yes, I remember that. Swami Vivekananda talks about that.
Yes, oh yes, very much so. And Swami Prabhavananda was very emphatic about this with his disciples. If you want to conserve the energy that is otherwise expended as sexuality, you will find that it will benefit you by greater and greater understanding, because what is otherwise a covering, this impulse for reproduction, as John Dobson says in his paper, if you follow that way, what happens? You get a family. You may have noticed. So, and what is a family? A family, it may be wonderful. A family may be wonderful in so many ways, but a family is definitely a distraction from spiritual life. And so when you have children and a spouse and all that that requires in terms of sustenance and shelter and so on and so forth, this is the virtue of continence, is that you have fewer of these distractions in your life. So it's absolutely not a question of good or bad. Good this, bad that. No, it's a question of utility. Thank you for bringing that up, Brahma.
Having been through all that, I do understand now why monks choose not to marry and live lives of continence. It gives them more time and energy to pursue God.
And the energy is a special kind. And it has its special benefits. You can look it up, OJAS. There is a great Swami Tathagatananda. You can go look into the books of Swami Tathagatananda. He wrote a book on the virtues and benefits of brahmacharya. And it's quite an elegant book and really explore this in detail if you're curious about it, if anyone's curious about that in more detail.
Brother Shankara,
Yes.
I had a thought, a couple of thoughts actually. One of them is related to what Brahmadas was just saying about survival. And it seems that this philosophy is so contrary to the idea, Swamiji's philosophy is so contrary to the idea of the survival of the fittest, you know, in the sense that it is, as you were just, I think, saying, against our genetic disposition to think this way, in this counterintuitive way, because, you know, we're at the very animal level focused on survival, say.
Survival and reproduction, yes.
Survival and reproduction. And
this
yet,
is what's meant by Sri Ramakrishna saying the impediments are, when he was speaking to men, he would say woman and gold. And when speaking to women, he would say men and gold.
yes.
These are the representations of this survival and reproduction.
Yes. And
so they are the primary distractions. He said they are the components of what we experience as egoism. They are what makes us think in terms of I, me, mine.
the identification with the body.
The identification with the imperatives of the body, yes.
Yeah. And the second thing that came to mind was, you know, it just reminded me of the Sermon on the Mount again. And when Christ says, ye have heard, thou shalt not kill, but anyone who cries Raka is also subject to judgment. And that just, I think, is exactly what Swamiji is saying here with the murderer has a soul.
Well, the murderer is the soul.
Is the soul
more deeply covered up than the person who would never, in this lifetime at least, do that. They may have done that in another lifetime. We don't know.
Brother Shankara?
Thank you.
Yes, yes.
So after you know, putting effort into Shravana and Manana, the philosophy, the ideal of Vedanta to a good extent, does appeal to the reasoning and intellect, and gets up to a certain point. This field of action, however, seems to be the double-edged sword. On the one hand, I think it is good because it helps us put theory into practice. On the other hand, it keeps dragging us back from, um, pushing headlong.
Yes, absolutely. And this is why it is wise of us to accept the invitation of the great souls, the incarnation, to allow them to help us, to take refuge with them, whether it be a Buddha, whether it be a Shankaracharya, whether it be a Krishna, a Ramakrishna, a Jesus. They all, in one way or another, if you read what they say, I offer you refuge. If you lean into me, if you take refuge with me, I will help you. I will, in fact, serve you. And so this is why we don't have to do this all on our own. Look at the number of people that are here with us this evening. How joyous. This is a representation of that energy, of that energy. You have all come together to visit this so that Swami Vivekananda, demonstrably a great soul, can offer us a push, a shove in the right direction. So then once we've become provisionally convinced of the truth of what he's saying, then we insist on it. Okay, I'm going to really try this. As you said, go headlong. I'm going to really try this. I'm going to insist on this truth rather than the truth of my genetic programming or my habits or whatever it is that is the product of my left mind. And so, yes, to what you said, there is, but beyond that, there is this component of the assistance, the service, actually. They yearn to serve us. They invite us to accept their help.
Thank you very much, Brother Shankar.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Okay. Now the Swami goes into something from an Upanishad. I don't know if it's the Kata or another. I think it's from the Kata. A definition to try to give our left mind, our reasoning mind, something to insist on. Our heart has no problem with this, but our left mind it needs to have something to insist on if you're going to persuade it to take a stand for this. So here's what the Swami says, quote, infinitely smaller than the smallest, infinitely larger than the largest. This Lord of all is present in the depths of every human heart. The sinless, bereft of all misery, see him through the mercy of the Lord. The bodiless, yet dwelling in the body, the spaceless, yet seeming to occupy space, Now, please let us take these words in. This is what he's saying is happening with us. The sinless, bereft of all misery, sinless because they've given up the idea of sin. They've offered it back to the Lord. The good and the bad. What did Sri Ramakrishna say? Mother, take thy virtue, take thy vice, and give me pure love for thee. The sinless, bereft of all misery, see him through the mercy of the Lord. The bodiless, the Atman, the bodiless, yet dwelling in the body, the spaceless, yet seeming to occupy space. Each of us seems to occupy space. And we have a bunch of things that occupy stuff. We have a bunch of stuff that seems to occupy space. It seems to belong to us. Ha ha ha. The spaceless, yet seeming to occupy space. Infinite, omnipresent, knowing such to be the soul, the sages never are miserable. Their action and experience suit may suffer, but they do not become miserable because of it. This Atman, again, this is a quote, this Atman is not to be realized by the power of speech, nor by a vast intellect. I'll start again. This Atman is not to be realized by the power of speech, nor by a vast intellect, nor by the study of their Vedas. Now, Swamiji was speaking of himself here. Who had greater power of speech? Who had a vaster intellect? Who had studied the Vedas more carefully? He's saying, that's not how I came to say all this to you. This Atman is not to be realized by the power of speech, nor by a vast intellect, nor by the study of their Vedas. This is a very bold utterance. As I told you before, the sages were very bold thinkers and never stopped at anything. You will remember that in India, the Vedas are regarded in a much higher light than even the Christians regard their Bible. Your idea of revelation is that a man was inspired by God. But in India, the idea is that things exist because they are in the Vedas. Now, we don't have time to explore that statement. At some point, perhaps a talk will be given about that. But it is a fact that among those people who really believe in and understand the Vedas, they say that things exist because they are in the Vedas. In and through the Vedas, the whole creation has come. All that is called knowledge, all that is called knowledge is in the Vedas. Every word is sacred and eternal, eternal as the soul, without beginning and without end. The whole of the Creator's mind is in this book, as it were. That is the light in which the Vedas are held. Why is this thing moral? Because the Vedas say so. Why is that thing immoral? Because the Vedas say so. In spite of that, look at the boldness of these sages whom proclaimed that the truth is not to be found by much study of the Vedas. With whom the Lord is pleased, to that man he expresses himself. So we've had some definition. Any comments or questions about this definition of how we actually learn? How we actually, again, the premise being that the divine presence alone is the doer, with whom the Lord is pleased, to that man, to that person, he expresses himself. Any comments or questions?
Yes, Brother Shankara, I just want to make a comment. When I was reading Bhagavad Gita, I think Lord really expresses himself to the self-realized soul, self-realization. That's what we go through the meditation, finding ourselves. That is how we connect with the divine. I think he's leading to that. Swami Vivekananda is leading us to that part. I'm thinking when I was reading Gita this morning, I was going through that divine you connect to divine self-realization, renunciation, self-realization path.
All those are the conceptual framework. Yes, you're absolutely right.
Okay.
But as Sri Ramakrishna said over and over, we must assimilate that.
Mhm.
We must become that. What does assimilate mean? When we take food,
Intertwined with.
when we take food,
That's right. We eat and digest.
we digest it,
Exactly.
and we take what nourishes us from that food. We assimilate that.
Yes. Okay.
That's what happens when we turn inward
Yes.
and realize that the thoughts, the way of speaking, and the way of acting
Mhm.
that we have been practicing
That's right.
it's not that it's bad and wrong, it's simply limited. And it is something happening in the presence of something else. And so slowly and slowly, our identification changes from the I, me, mindness of the thoughts, speech, and action that we have been manifesting to the thee, thou, thineness
Yes.
of the divine presence within us. That which the Swami has identified as eternal, deathless, birthless, pure, perfect. All of these adjectives gesturing towards something that cannot be expressed.
Also, that's when Swami, I think, says that the ego becomes healthier, right? The unhealthy ego subsides, then the healthy ego comes forward.
He
We are able.
doesn't use the word unhealthy and healthy. He uses immature and mature,
Mature
and,
ego,
and unripe and ripe.
ripe and unripe. That's right. Yes.
The ripe ego,
Comes forward.
well, it actually, he says, recedes. It actually becomes, as he says, like a shy child.
Yes. Thank you, Brother
It
Shankar.
recedes from its attempts at distracting us.
Yes. That's right. Thank you.
Thank you, Haima. Anything
Brother
else from
Shankar?
anyone? Yes.
So when he says, with whom the Lord is pleased, to that man he expresses himself.
Mm-hmm.
So the Lord expresses himself as how the devotee would like the Lord to express himself. Is that an interpretation?
That's certainly one of the things that the saints say, is that the Lord will, our beloved will become the beloved that we want. Hmm? But that isn't the meaning of this sentence. With whom the Lord is pleased, to that man he expresses himself. And this business of the Lord being pleased, the Lord is pleased, as Krishna so clearly says in the Gita. The Lord is pleased with the ones who have turned their face away from the worldliness. Not that they don't continue to do their duties, they continue to do their duties, but they invest their heart's energy, their heart's, their inner being in this seeking for the divine. And this is what is pleasing. And so, and as Sri Ramakrishna is very explicit, Mother holds the keys. And when she's ready, she opens the door. Now, when she's ready, she is, in that sense, the you of you. So when you are ready, Mother as she opens the door. But in this devotional relationship that you were just speaking of, Swayam, the saints tell us that the Lord will dance with us as we wish to be danced with. The Lord will feed us as we wish to be fed. There is this very sweet and profound relationship that is available to us. The jiva, the embodied being, and the divine presence. It's a step below realization, full realization that thou art that. And it involves what we call savikalpa samadhi. Understanding that that the divine presence is all that there is, and we are a part of that. So yes, the Lord will, or Mother, depending on how you wish to see it, the relationship you have. Sri Ramakrishna had a relationship with Mother. Radha had a relationship with Krishna. And it was all she cared about. And so Krishna became everything for her. Thank you, Swami.
Yeah, sweet.
Yes, someone else was speaking.
I had a question, just a quick one about the difference between Jiva and Atman.
Oh,
Or is there a difference?
oh
Is a
yeah.
better way.
The jiva comes and goes. You are now divyaner, an embodied being, a jiva. Jiva means that which breathes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you breathe. And there's a very profound meaning to breathe. It has to do with prana and so on. But divyaner will live a certain number of years. And then that divyaner embodiment will drop away, depending on what state of awareness and consciousness you are in at the time that the Atman departs, the subtle body and the Atman together depart the Divya Nair embodiment, will determine whether you take another body or not. And Krishna says in chapter 2, don't worry about it. You know, if you're tired of being embodied, he says later on in the Gita in many different ways, here are the ways to stop that. If you're not tired of being embodied, as Sri Ramakrishna said, you've come to the mango grove, eat the mangoes. Don't be ashamed. There's nothing to be ashamed about. So as long as we wish to be that which breathes, we will become another jiva. When we wish devoutly enough, when we can say with absolute conviction, ah, how I long for the day when an instant's separation from thee, O Govinda, will be as 1,000 years. When my heart burns away with its desire, and the world without thee is a heartless void. When we reach that state, then we're not going to take another body. When my heart burns away with its desire. That's from Chaitanya's prayer.
So back to that question then, the Atman, which the Swami speaks of here in the Vedas, is the higher self then, not a jiva, a eternal
The
soul?
jiva is not eternal. The Atman is eternal. The Atman is that which is expressing this body, as Krishna says in chapter 5, for its own purposes. And that's absolutely imponderable. We don't know, but there is an interpretation of it as the last few pages of Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga. He talks about, in a very poetic way, how it is that we come to be embodied beings and what we're doing as embodied beings and what happens to us when there's no longer any need for us to be embodied beings. Because that which has taken these bodies is this eternal, pure, birthless, deathless being, which the Swami is calling the Atman.
You know, that makes me wonder about Sri Ramakrishna, what he said. I think somewhere in the gospel, he said, I shall have to take another birth in a northwesterly direction.
Yes, well, he's the divine being ushering in the Satyug. That's why he has to do this. You know, he came as Chaitanya, which was the beginning of the end of the Satyug, you could say. No, that's actually inaccurate, but it's close enough. That's the first wave, so to speak. And notice that the emphasis was bhakti. He came again as Sri Ramakrishna, and the emphasis was bhakti. He says over and over in the gospel that the path of devotion is the appropriate path for this time, this dying away of the Kali Yuga, and this arising, this awakening of the next age. And he said, I'll have to come again in 200 years, which if you take it as from the time that he left the body in 1886, that would make it 2086. And he said he would come in an unknown way. You know, Sri Ramakrishna became known. And by 2086, the Sri Ramakrishnas, the followers of Sri Ramakrishna will have increased even more, no doubt. That's the conviction from here anyway.
And a northwesterly direction sounds like United States or Canada, doesn't it?
Well, you know, the interpretation is that it would be Gujarat,
Oh.
Rajasthan, that area. We don't know. There's a beautiful little story published in the last issue of American Vedantist that speculates that he was born in, I believe, Norway, as a girl, as a young girl. It's a fantasy. It's a beautiful thing by a writer named Bill Page who lives in Thailand. But it's really worth your reading. It's quite striking. So we don't know. And not, Holy Mother wasn't definitive about it. Vivekananda wasn't definitive about it. There's only speculation that he meant. And he said he would be born as a Baul. Again, this is an indication that he would still be born in India. But the Bauls are homeless people. They're homeless minstrels. And they go about singing the name and glory of the Lord.
Alek.
What is that, Divya?
Oh, the Bauls, their idea of, I guess, Brahman or something like that is, I think Sri Ramakrishna says Alek. They worship, they're, when they worship.
Which means what, dear?
I don't know exactly what it translates into, but Alek is the being that they worship.
Aha.
But I forget which book in the gospel it's in, but Sri Ramakrishna talks a great deal about the Baul people.
Oh, yeah. He admired them greatly
Yes.
because of their renunciation. They're homeless. They don't have much in the way of possessions. They don't accumulate things. They just go about, they're minstrels going about singing the name and glory of God.
Yes.
Is it the people that say Alak Niranjan? I've heard that. I don't know.
So, say it again, Somesh. I missed the first part.
So there are people who says Alak Niranjan, like I've seen in movies, Hindi movies, and also met certain people who go door to door, to collect food and all. They say Alak Niranjan, and that Alak means one that cannot be seen.
Aha. Thank you.
Yeah.
One who cannot be seen. Well, Sri Ramakrishna said that he would not be known in this next incarnation. But he doesn't have to be known to bring this great wave of spirituality into the world by simply his presence. And of course, he said he'd bring his band of minstrels with him, bring his followers with him.
Why do you suppose so many of the avatars were born in India? It's even speculated that during his missing years, Jesus had went to India.
Well, Swami Vivekananda very much debunked that idea. But we can believe what we wish to believe. Well, the reason I think that so many avatars are born in India is that India welcomes them instead of kills them.
I guess I wouldn't want to be born in a place where they're going to kill me. That makes sense.
Well, Christ speaks very bluntly about the fact that you've done this with all the prophets. He tells it in the form of parables. God sends his messenger, you kill him. He sends his son, you kill him. Because you don't want to hear what he has to say. In India, it's a different, every place on earth has its own special aspect, apparently. One of India's is this receptiveness to, as Vivekananda said, in India, you can start doing the most bizarre thing And if you insist it'll achieve God realization, you'll have 500 followers in no time. But if you wish to understand the concept of avatar and incarnation, I really suggest you read Swami Vivekananda's talk, Christ the Messenger, which he gave at, I believe, a Methodist church in Pasadena in the year 1900. And it's a beautiful, beautiful statement of why avatars are, why they come, what they do. And he marveled out loud for these Christians at the fact that Christ's work was still unfolding nearly 2,000 years, 1,900 years after his advent. And what he says about Christ is, of course, applicable to the other avatars as well, the other incarnations. We have just a few minutes left. It's 8:56. Anything else from anyone? All right, then I will read what the Swami says about what this quote that he just read. But then the objection may advance that this is something like partisanship. If the Lord's pleased, to him he expresses himself. And the Swami says, but then the objection may be advanced that this is something like partisanship, favoritism. But Yama explains, those who are evildoers, whose minds are not peaceful, can never see the light. It is those who are true in the heart, pure indeed, whose senses are controlled, that the self manifests itself. So in other words, as I said earlier, what is it that pleases the Lord so that there's a manifestation? It's controlling that which obscures the manifestation. Here is a beautiful figure. Picture the self to be then richer than this body. Here is a beautiful figure. Picture the self to be then rider, and this body the chariot, the intellect to be the charioteer, mind the reins, and the senses the horses. He whose horses are well broken, and whose reins are strong, and kept well in the hands of the charioteer, the intellect, reaches the goal, which is the state of him, the omnipresent. I'll read that again. The horses being the senses. The senses are the horses. He whose horses are well broken, the senses are well restrained, in other words. He whose horses are well broken, and whose reins are strong, and well in the hands of the charioteer, the intellect, reaches the goal, which is the state of him, the omnipresent. But the man whose horses, the senses, are not controlled, nor the reins, the mind, well managed, goes to destruction. What does he mean by destruction? He means to death and rebirth. That's what's meant by destruction. This Atman in all beings does not manifest himself to the eyes of the senses, but those whose mind has become purified and reified realize him. By purified and reified, he means turned within. Any final thoughts from anyone? Any thoughts or questions from anyone? Now, I'll just remind us that, as Swami Vivekananda said, this is the most difficult of all philosophy to grasp, to make our own, and for us to make it work for us. This is the highest realm of non-dual philosophy. So the fact that all of us, including myself, struggle with this, it's nothing to be wondered at. We are studying Swami Vivekananda, the thoughts of someone who had recently been in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, had returned from that state, and was speaking these ideas from that place of realization. He's doing his best to explain and make it clear to us. So, any final thought from anyone?
Sometimes, of course, at a very sort of surface level, it seems so simple that the only thing I know that I am. Everything else has been fed to me, that my name is Swayam, I'm from India, I'm a girl, and but that I am, I know.
Yes, thank you, Swayam. We do know it. We do intuitively know it. It's only counterintuitive to our reasoning mind, because we so identify with the body and the senses, which, as Hafiz says, the body and the mind are well known for holding the heart ransom. All right. Om Hari Om. Om Sato Ma Satgamaya. Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya. Mrityorma Amrutangamaya. Abir Moiti. O dearly beloved Lord, lead us from this partial understanding to full understanding and the absolute truth. Lead us from partial understanding to full understanding and the absolute truth. Lead us from darkness and ignorance to the brilliance of thy wisdom and love. Lead us from darkness and ignorance to the brilliance of thy wisdom and love. Lead us from death to immortality. Lead us from death to immortality. Light us through and through. Light us through and through with thy everlasting, shining presence. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Durga, Durga, Durga. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be cheerful. May you have peace of mind. May you go forward in the loving and protective embrace of the Divine Being. So, any final thought or question from anyone? All right, dears. Well, then, until our next opportunity to gather will be on Saturday, and I honestly don't remember, as I'm sitting here, what the topic for the talk on Sunday is.
It's Mother's Day.
Oh, that's right, it's Mother's Day. And so what is the talk?
A Mother's Love.
A Mother's Love. Thank you. It's a bhakti talk about the mother's love. Yes. Thank you, Sharda. And it is indeed Mother's Day. So, and then for those of you who are part of this congregation or wish to be a part of it, you can join us on the 16th at 11 a.m. for the annual meeting of our congregation and hear about how the center runs. You hear from the Board of Trustees and the committee chairs, and the resident minister makes a report, and then a new Board of Trustees, or the next year's Board of Trustees, is elected. That's what will happen on the 16th.
It's more fun than it sounds.
It can be.
It can be.
All right. All right, dear ones, until we meet again, happy trails to you, as used to be said.
Thank you. Good night,
Thank
everybody.
Thank you. Hari Om.
Good night, everyone.